Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we're covering the AP Top 25 college football poll after week 3 of the college season. Super excited to continue this series. Of course, we've done weeks 1 and 2 as well, and we're going to be continuing this throughout the year, especially as we're tracking the college football playoffs, some teams that could be the headliners by the end of the year. And of course, every single game matters so very much in the college football rankings because a lot of the time a team has to have a perfect record or really close to it to make that college football playoffs like we talked about. So let's jump into it here. We're going to talk about the top 25 and some others receiving votes as well. Michigan State, 91. They were a team in the top 15 last week, had a disastrous loss, ended up dropping out. Florida State, the Seminoles, a team that has a pretty good historic program. They haven't been quite up to par with what the expectations are there in recent history, but they have 85 votes. So they're just on the outside looking in as well, back into the top 25 here. You also see Appalachian State. They've been a really fun story in recent weeks. Of course, had the big upset win. And then last week, they just had the Hail Mary game winner, which was absolutely insane. Again, Boone, North Carolina is going insane. And then one other team I want to highlight here, University of Minnesota. They're at 48 total votes at this point. Still on the outside looking in, but they have been steamrolling their opponents. They destroyed Jerry Kill in week 1. I was actually at that game in person. And then also this past week, they were 28-point favorites and ended up winning that game favorably. So Minnesota's been playing really well. I think they're a team to watch to potentially make this top 25 at some point. And then let's jump into number 25 itself. Here we have Miami of Florida, 2-1 record, and that one loss came this week to Texas A&M, another top 25 ranked team. And you see Miami holds on here in the top 25 very narrowly, only 32 more votes than Michigan State. And that loss was kind of a disaster here for Miami. Their quarterback spent quite a bit of time with QB Summit founder Jordan Palmer this past week, and Van Dyke didn't really play up to par with what you'd expect from him. Of course, earlier this year had that flea flicker that got him a lot of notoriety, and he's been playing pretty well, but this week was not an example of that. Miami lost, and you see them take a hit in the standings, moving down 12 spots, which is insane. Pittsburgh at 24 now. They moved down one spot as well. They did get the win by 21 points, but some of these teams, they beat a top 25 opponent. They're going to jump up a little bit more. Texas A&M, they move up one spot after their win over Miami of Florida. Remember, A&M earlier this year had a bad loss. Thought maybe they could have dropped out. Kind of re-solidified their standing here in the top 25 after beating Miami. But at the same time, it's not the most impressive win. We're looking at two back at top 25 teams. It's not like two top 5, top 10 teams here. You're looking anywhere from the range of 25 to maybe 18 is what I see for Miami and Texas A&M this year. Now, potentially, could I be wrong about that? And could one of these teams get hot and really solidify themselves as a top 15 team? Potentially. But at this point, the Aggies have been a little shaky. 22, we got Texas, the Longhorns, of course, very narrowly beat Alabama. And had they would have been so much higher in these standings. But at this point, 22, their 2-1 record, they had a really good showing against UTSA. That's a game you have to win, and they won favorably by 3 touchdowns. So definitely a good performance by them. Texas has been balling this year. Obviously, we're going to have to keep our eyes on Quinn Ewers and his health and everything. But at this point, the Longhorns have been playing well. Wake Forest, their QB Sam Hartman, he's been really the driving force for them. However, a 1-point win against Malik Willis's alma mater, Liberty, probably not going to get the job done. That's a team to watch. If they're going to continue to play like that, they're going to make themselves susceptible to losing games, whether it's at home or on the road. And it's definitely something that we do have to keep our eyes on, which is very similar here to Florida at 20. They're a 2-1 record. They dropped 2 spots. I was very curious where Florida was going to end up in this ranking because they just did not outperform South Florida to the standard you would expect, especially with a guy who's probably going to be a top 10 pick at QB in AR-15, Anthony Richardson. They looked phenomenal in week 1. Week 2 took a big step back. And then this week didn't really build back off of that. Didn't really go out there super motivated. Yes, they won by a field goal, but it's against a program that, quite frankly, Florida should be better than. And it was at home in Tallahassee. Florida has to take advantage of future games, especially if they want to get back up into that top 10 ranking. And we see BYU here take a huge hit. They go down 7 spots after losing to Oregon. Oregon, of course, first game of the year got destroyed. And I mean, absolutely destroyed by Georgia in what was one of the least competitive games of the year, including all of these bad matchups to start the season. But Oregon handled BYU favorably here by 21 points. Last week, we talked about how BYU was starting to build up that program. They had an impressive win the week before, and they don't have the ability to build off of that. In fact, they take a big step back, dropping 7 spots in this week's ranking. But here we see UW, University of Washington, another team I was very interested in seeing. Talked about Michigan State with their disappointing loss. You see it, 2-score game. They lost to Washington. Pac-12, kind of an interesting situation right now. Oregon's getting back on track. Washington finds himself in the top 25. Of course, last year produced Trent McDuffie, Kyler Gordon as well. So they had 2 cornerbacks make it to the NFL, but they're rolling this year as well now. 3-0. We'll have to see if they can keep building. I think this Michigan State win is going to be a headliner for them. That's one of the most important wins of the year for this team. And it's really one that does solidify them at this point as a top 25 team, in my opinion. And had they not gotten this win, their top 25 hopes would have been rather desperate, I think. But the fact that they got it, it really propelled them up to this point to number 18. Obviously you could ask some questions. Wake Forest 3-0. Do they belong below Washington? I think with this win, that's the highest quality win out of all of these teams at this point. Had Texas had the win over Alabama, you would obviously have Texas above these teams. And had a cornerback wrapped up in week 2 against Alabama, we probably would see the Longhorns quite a bit higher. But ultimately, Washington, probably the most impressive win from these teams from 18 to 22. So it's definitely deserved, in my opinion, that they are at 18. And now let's move up 17 to 11. This ranking here is where we get into a lot of the, meat and potatoes of this, where the AP Top 25 starts to really show its hand. Baylor, 2-1. They dominated Texas State. That's the expectation going in. Baylor, a very good program historically, and a program that I think is going to continue to play well this year. Of course, 2-1 record, not really what you want, especially in that tough Big 12 when you have teams like Oklahoma State that you're trying to battle with. It does put Baylor at a big disadvantage here, but they took care of business this week. Ole Miss shuts out Georgia Tech in what was a very dominating performance from them. They move up 4 spots for really handling Georgia Tech easily in this game. And I think it's deserved here. You also have some teams jumping down just based off of losses. You look at like BYU, Michigan State. Those are 2 teams that moved down below Ole Miss just because of their lack of performance this week. The top 25 really did handle their business for the most part this week, besides a few schools. Oregon, again, we talked about them against BYU, dominated. They looked much better. And outside of that week 1, loss where they played arguably the best team in the nation, and I don't think a lot of people would argue against that even in Georgia, Oregon's looked pretty good this year. Obviously, that week 1 game really leaves a taste in your mouth that says, hey, this is probably not a college football playoff level team, right? But they are a top 15 caliber team in the nation. That's what they just showed this week against BYU. Penn State, they've been rolling. Obviously, their QB got lit up this week. If you guys know what I'm talking about, if you've been on social media at all, I'm sure you've seen that hit where an Auburn linebacker just lit up the Penn State quarterback, and the ball went flying about 15, 20 yards out of bounds with that big of a jarring hit. But Penn State, despite that one big hit, they took care of business, won by 29 points, and really kind of controlled the tempo of that game. I would say that was one of the biggest things. You see them get a huge boost here as well with that big win over Auburn, a program that has been pretty good historically in Auburn, and Penn State just was outmatching them on pretty much every element of the game. Utah back up to 13 here. They go up 1 spot. We've seen the AP Top 25 play a little more careful this year with overreacting to teams' losses early in the season. Last year, they were pretty quick to move teams out like Texas A&M. This year, we've seen them kind of hang out in the top 25. One of the viewers on the last week's video commented that it's to sell matchups, that maybe, hey, we have a top 25 matchup here where 2 top 25 teams are going against each other. I think there's some legitimacy to that. They are trying to, really sell games at some point. And I think the AP Top 25 could be helping them out with that just a little bit. But at the same time, these are independent voters. So I think realistically, they just view these teams as still good. And I think they're looking at the roster talent a little bit more this year than typically. And I think that is a good thing just for keeping the rankings a little bit more balanced week to week and not overreacting all the time. NC State, Tennessee, not a lot to say about these 2 teams this week. Played worse opponents. I think NC State beating Texas Tech, that was a must win for them. And Tennessee, they needed to roll Akron at home. You need to beat Akron. You need to beat them down good. And they did by 57 points. So, an ACC school, SEC school, I think those two teams are going to be here to stay for a while in the AP top 25. I say that now, though, and they'll probably lose next week because that's how this goes. Now we're going from 10 to 6. We got Arkansas here from the SEC with a 38-27 win over Missouri State. I think that one left a little to be desired here from the Razorbacks. They're a better team than Missouri State. I think that they could have won that game a little bit more comfortably, but at the end of the day, a win's a win, and they got it. Oklahoma State moves to 3-0 as well. They were one of those Big 12 teams I highlighted earlier. A 56-point win over Arkansas Pine Bluff. They took care of business. Again, that's the expectation here. When you get into these top 10 schools against some of these weaker opponents, they need to go in and win, and they do so. Kentucky 3-0. They've been really one of the surprise teams in the last 2-3 years. They just continue to get better. Historically known as a basketball program, but their football program is here to stay as well. Shut out Youngstown State this year. Obviously, Youngstown State, again, not the greatest program, but taking care of business is all you can do. You have to play your schedule, and you have to play it well. Kentucky did that this week, and they moved to 3-0 and look to move to 4-0 next week. USC here at number 7. They are 3-0, representing the Pac-12. And again, the Pac-12 is a little bit better now. You see UW in there. You see Oregon and USC. Last year was a real down year for the Pac-12. They're back a little bit. Huge win over Fresno State by about 28 points here. And University of Southern California, again, you see a lot of historically great schools. That's because there's not a lot of parity in college football. Look at some of the scores this week. I know a lot of people are really high on college football and love it. I like watching it too. Don't get me wrong. But some of these games just are not competitive. Look at Oklahoma. They beat Nebraska, which Nebraska is one of the best programs historically ever. Especially when you look back, even before I was born type of timeline. Nebraska was great. They got destroyed by 35 points. Of course, Nebraska, interestingly, fired their head coach. Not that he didn't deserve that, but had they waited like 2 weeks to do it, they probably could have saved themselves about $7.5 million on his contract. Decided to not do it, fired him early. Didn't really pay dividends this week, losing by 35 points to Oklahoma. And then we move into Clemson. And this team, we had talked about them a lot last week. Win by 4 touchdowns against Louisiana Tech, a school that historically produces some NFL talent. Clemson obviously produces so much NFL talent, and their QB that they're rocking with right now, DJ, it's no different. He's going to be an NFL guy at some point, you would think. And they're really starting to roll this year, kind of what everyone expected from them last year. There was a little bit more of a transition period than a lot of the people expected after moving off of Trevor Lawrence as he went to the NFL draft with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the Clemson program right now, 3-0. They're looking to continue building. The ACC has gotten a lot stronger in college football as well. So there's a huge testament to that. But again, the SEC, Big Ten, those are probably 2 of the top 3 programs as well. And we're going to see them heavily represented here in the top 4. Michigan, Ohio State, 2 Big Ten schools. Michigan, of course, last year had Aiden Hutchinson. They just didn't pull out the job by the end of the year. They were great all year long and just let it slip in the Big Ten, en route to the Big Ten championship, just didn't get to where they wanted to go. And Ohio State did. Ryan Day, one of the best coaches in all of college football. I mean, again, if we're talking about parity, look at the scores here. 59-0 against UConn for Michigan. UConn's a pretty decent school in terms of, size and student population. Obviously very good at basketball in the Big East, but UConn not going to be competitive with Michigan on any given Saturday throughout the college football season. And Toledo, I mean, like, what is Toledo supposed to do going into Ohio State? Is there any chance they win that game? If we play that game 100 times, how many times would Toledo win? Probably none of them, right? So Ohio State, Michigan, 2 teams that definitely belong in the top 4. They deserve their ranking right now. You can see that by their scores this week. They dominated their matchups and played who they had on the schedule and took care of it. Now we get into the top 2 schools here. Alabama, Georgia, the same rankings as last week. We haven't seen a lot of movement here in the top 10. In fact, only Kentucky and Oklahoma State really switched spots. So again, I talked about it. The top 25 took care of business this week. We saw that. Alabama stays at number 2 here after a big win over UL Monroe, which is funny because UL Monroe is one of the 17 schools that has beaten Nick Saban since Nick Saban went to Alabama, which is insane. This week, though, they couldn't get the job done. And Georgia moves to 3-0 with a huge win over South Carolina. The Gamecocks just could not move the football down the field. I think Spencer Rattler had something along the lines of 110 passing yards in the entire duration of that game. Rattler was someone who was thought of as maybe being a potential top 5 pick at one point, and just doesn't really look the part anymore. But Georgia's special. I seen graphics saying they've scored like 110 points this year and only given up 10 points. I feel like they've barely given up any first downs even. Georgia's been really, really good, and they deserve the number 1 spot, in my opinion. Let me know down in the comment section right now who you think should be the number 1 team in the nation. Right now, I feel really strongly about Georgia, though. It's incredible what Kirby Smart's done with that program, losing so many guys to the NFL draft and still being the top team in the nation. That is very tough to do, but they're getting the job done each and every week, and it was really started off with that big win over Oregon in week 1. Thank you guys so much for watching here. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like on the video and also subscribe to Utility Sports for more future content like this. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.